Well, hello there, you Scrublords, and welcome to another Scrub Chats episode. This is your host, Many Miles Away, and today we're going to be discussing basically my impressions of 1.67 now that it's been released, and I've had a little bit of time to play it. I haven't gotten a chance to play all the vehicles, but I'm basically going to give you my impressions of the patch so far. There's going to be a few things that I don't really like about this patch, and I will get to those in due time, but there's a few good things about the patch. Actually, before I get to the good things, let's talk about the bad things about this patch. I'm not going to delay here, I'm just going to jump right in. So, the worst thing about this patch, by far, was the buffs and nerfs to Hesh that they made this patch. And I realize this is kind of an oxymoron right now, considering the vehicle I'm driving, because this is one of the vehicles, or probably the only vehicle, that wasn't really affected at all by this buffing and nerfing of the Hesh rounds right before the update came out. Now, if you're not totally sure what I'm talking about, on the dev server, the first time they released it this last Saturday, they had buffed Hesh on the dev server. They had buffed its penetration so that the Centurion Mark 10 had 155 millimeters of penetration. All the 105 millimeter guns had 155, which effectively meant that their Hesh rounds could one-shot King Tigers through their upper front plates on a regular basis. I saw this as a pretty good change. And then they also buffed the 120 millimeter guns on the on the Chieftain, the Conqueror, and the Conway. They also buffed all their Hesh rounds so that their penetration went up to 180 millimeters. And that was a really interesting change as well, because it took a lot of the RNG out of shooting the upper front plates of, say, T10s, for example, and you were far less likely to simply detonate and not do any damage. Regardless of these changes, when the patch was released, or right before the patch was released, gaijin were experimenting with this patch right up until its release. Literally the day before, they were changing things on their own dev server when it was closed. And one of the things they changed on the dev server was they nerfed the Hesh penetration pretty much across the board from the dev server levels. However, they buffed Hesh's post-penetration damage to help compensate for that. And so what they did was they reduced the FE405's penetration from 274 to 255 or 254. So it dropped 20 millimeters off, which doesn't seem to have helped that King Tiger any. And they also dropped the 120 millimeter penetration from 180 to 152, which is fine. It's still a buff, technically, to the 120 millimeters, but I was really hoping it was going to be like the 180. But the major nerf came to the 105 millimeter guns, and they dropped the penetration from 155 and 150 on the live server down to 127, which is a real big problem for vehicles like the Centurion Mark 10, which rely on the Hesh rounds and its APDS to take care of itself. The Hesh rounds are the only rounds on that tank that do any significant amount of damage with a single shot, unless you're ammo racking people with your APDS, which can sometimes be kind of unreliable. So this really pissed me off when I first heard about it. Like, I was infuriated for hours. And now that I've had some time to play, I'm still angry about it, but it's not as game-breaking as it initially sounds. I still don't support this decision. I don't think that anybody was crying for Hesh to be nerfed. If anything, Hesh has been asked to have been buffed ever since it was introduced, and when it was introduced, it was totally useless. And by doing what they have done... Oh, give me 1 second while I just nuke this King Tiger here out of existence. By gaijin doing what they have done, they have effectively removed any real reason to use 105mm Hesh, especially at Tier 5. If gaijin were trying to reduce the Heat FS spam and get people to try and move away from that round, this is not the way to do it. This has, if anything, it's made it worse. And even with the cool stabilizers and everything that Tier 5s have gotten, which I will get to in a moment, the Hesh was a really good alternative. It did just as much or more damage than Heat FS if you could get it to work. and it required a certain degree of skill to get it to work, whereas Heat FS is a lot more of a point-and-click adventure game. Some people really hated Heat FS before the patch. Some people are liking it more now that the post-pen damage has been buffed. But it's still not perfect, and it's still not in a great position, especially now that it's been nerfed in the way that it has. And I don't think personally that that nerf was necessary at all. And like I said, it should have been buffed, if anything. The 150mm penetration, well, on the 105mm guns, should have gone up to 155 in my opinion. And would that have created issues for King Tigers? Yeah, but Hesh creates issues for a lot of vehicles, and frankly, that's where it should be. It's in the same realm as Heat FS in that regard. Heat FS is across the board generally has very, very high penetration, and that's historically accurate. And I don't understand why Gaijin would nerf such a round when nobody was asking for it to be nerfed. I mean, the IS-2s kind of got a bit of that nerf bat last one of the major balancing patches, or the most recent major balancing patch with the BRs, where they removed the BR-471D shell from those from the IS-2 Mod 44 and its variants, and a lot of people are wondering why they did that. Now, for the IS-2 Mod 44, that kind of makes sense in the regard that they were getting a lower battle rating, so they really didn't need that high penetration shell when it was really only there to help IS-2 Mod 44s fight a mouse. And now that they're at a lower battle rating, unless you bring them into a higher battle rating game with higher battle rating vehicles, you're not likely to see one at all. So that shell was totally unnecessary for those vehicles, and it was pretty unhistorical for where it was at. That makes sense. However, the Hesh nerf really doesn't make sense, unless somebody can show me some primary source documentation that shows 105mm Hesh has this penetration, then I don't buy it. So that's the worst thing about this patch, in my personal opinion, the Hesh nerfs. The Hesh buffs, on the other hand, and post-pen damage are very much welcome. I just don't think that it was worth getting that post-pen damage over losing your almost all of your capabilities on your 105mm guns. And they may have also done that to help clear the way to make the IS-6 slightly better. I mean, I don't know. Some people will probably argue that's Russian bias, but yeah, I doubt that's the case. My major issue is that Gaijin did not communicate why they did this this. And they don't communicate these things generally. They've been better about it in the past year, and I thought we were past this whole thing. Gaijin taking these balance decisions and not informing the community about it and asking our opinion. It's fine if you're introducing like new vehicles and such, but if you're balancing current ones, at least ask the community why, like how would you want this vehicle balanced, or how should we balance Hesh, or tell us at least why you balanced Hesh the way you did, because to me what you did really doesn't make any sense. Some people will call me a butthurt British fanboy or something like that, or a butthurt Hesh fanboy, but I mean, to an extent that is true. But at the same time, the reason why I'm so butthurt about this is because Hesh has been underperforming ever since it was introduced into the game. And really, the only vehicle that we have ever had in the game that is actually performing very, very well with Hesh is the Death Star, the Battle Barn. The FE4005 Stage 2 is the best Hesh slinging vehicle in the game. Now, granted, it's the only shell that it fires, but it's so ridiculously deadly and effective that you just one-shot pretty much everything you hit. And that's, frankly, kind of what I was hoping Hesh was going to be. Not that it was going to be a one-hit wonder. You should still have to aim at the enemy tank, but you would have to hit them in a spot that they're vulnerable to Hesh with. The FE4005 is kind of an exception to that because its Hesh penetration is literally just off the charts, even with the 20mm penetration nerf. But regardless, I don't think that the Hesh nerf was a reasonable thing to do. As for other things going on this patch, speaking of ammunition types, They did something very good this patch, by the way. In case you didn't know, they buffed the 120mm armor-piercing damage from the for American tanks. So the T-34 and the M103's AP rounds now hit like APHE. If you didn't know this, then go try it out yourself. If you have an M103 or a T-34, take it out to the test range and shoot at some targets and watch the damage. I have had great success in whenever I penetrate enemy vehicles with the T-34, especially. I haven't really played the M103 yet. I wanted to get some decent gameplay footage of the T-34, and I've only gotten one ace game at the T-34 so far. I think it was my very first game I ever played with it. Unfortunately, I played it on my shit top, which is not here, where I'm currently staying at, and so I don't have the replay to show you guys. Maybe I can transfer that over to this PC whenever I next get the chance, and I can show you that replay, but... the T-34 is a decent tank. It's not great. It's a good tank, and do I think it's a worthy counterpart to the T-29? Most definitely. The issue that the T-34 faces right now is the IS-6. The T-34 does not have the ammunition types to effectively kill an IS-6. It just doesn't. The IS-6 has the one thing that the T-34 does not counter very well, and that's sloped armor. And the IS-6 is literally one giant piece of sloped armor. It's rounded in places, it's sloped everywhere, it's just not an easy target for the T-34 to kill. And that goes with the T-20, that goes for the T-29 as well. The T-29 struggles just as much against the IS-6. And it's really, it really drops the vehicle's effectiveness, I think, or it drops the vehicle's reputation in a lot of people's eyes, because there are just so many IS-6s about, for good reason, too, and I'll get to that in a moment, that there's just no reason why you would, like, if you have an IS-6 and you had the option to play the T-34, why would you play the T-34 over the IS-6? And I think this could be easily rectified if they gave the T-34 its heat rounds, or if they gave the T-34 its high-explosive plastic that it was capable of firing, then I think it would be perfectly fine. The high-explosive plastic has about 152 millimeters of penetration, exactly 6 inches. The heat rounds might be a little bit more problematic to introduce because they have about 380 millimeters of penetration, basically making it a lower-tier M103. If you did that, just with lower penetration rounds in other regards. But I do feel that the T-34 right now, while a good tank, is overshadowed by the fact that it has significant issues. And the main issue being that it doesn't have an ammunition type capable of defeating sloped armor on a regular basis, which is a major issue for a vehicle like that, which relies on its one-hit damage in order to take somebody out of the fight, much like the IS-6 relies on its one-hit damage to take somebody out of the fight. Excuse me. So, the T-34, while it has excellent potential, is let down by its ammunition types, despite the buff to the armor-piercing rounds. And when you do penetrate, when you're facing Germans with the T-34, it is a great machine for going up against King Tigers. And the King Tigers can kill the T-34. It's not like the T-34 is invincible. Now that people have figured out how to actually fight T-29s and T-34s, like, they're not that difficult to kill people, and I've been saying that ever since it was introduced. And the T-34's AP rounds, because they do so much damage, it doesn't need APHE. And people who are saying, oh yeah, the T-34 sucks because it doesn't have APHE, obviously have not played the T-34, and obviously haven't, or either that or they haven't gotten any kills with the T-34. Because the T-34, with those AP rounds, is devastating if it can penetrate you. Like, it will one-shot most vehicles that it penetrates. I mean, if you give it significant ability to fragment and fly through like the middle of the tank, it's going to kill most of your crew in one hit. But again, the key thing is that it doesn't have the higher penetration or the anti-sloped armor ammunition types to effectively deal with vehicles like IS-6. Now, moving on to IS-6, I posted a video yesterday talking a little bit about it, and I mentioned in that video that it's not overpowered, but it's very strong, and I stand by that. and I will always stand by that. People have been asking me all the time, both in random battles I've been playing and in the YouTube comment section of that video. Where do I think that the IS-6 and the RU-251 should be placed in their battle ratings? Because everybody has the impression right now that these vehicles are just ridiculous. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people have this impression right now that these vehicles are overpowered and that they need to be rebalanced. I don't think that's the case. I think the issue that people are having is because they're brand new and there's so many of them on the battlefield that people don't know quite how to fight them yet. People were doing the same thing with the T-29. They were doing the same thing with the SLA-16. It happens every single patch, and I still see people saying that a vehicle's overpowered just because it was introduced. And that's just people jumping to conclusions and not properly analyzing the gameplay and not analyzing the way the game is set up. I should probably word that better, by the way. They're not analyzing their own performance and figuring out ways to counter such vehicles. The IS-6 is a tough vehicle to counter, I will admit. It is a very, very tough vehicle. However, it has two major weaknesses. The fact that its gun, despite having a fast rate of fire, is very slow loading for its tier. There are much faster guns. And the gun doesn't... actually, there's three reasons. The gun doesn't... while it can do a lot of damage, the 122mm Russian guns haven't been doing a crazy amount of damage. They haven't been doing anything better than, say, the 105mm APHE on T-29 on the Doom Turtle. On top of that, the turret rotation speed on the IS-6 is very poor. Very, very poor. It's not hand-cranked bad, but it's not powered turret good. Or if it is a powered turret, it's a very, very slow turret traverse. Which means that it's pretty easy to flank. If you've got a fast mobile vehicle and you've got room to maneuver, you can easily get around the IS-6. And I know that some people were really struggling to actually penetrate this thing, even with Hesh, but in my personal experience, even firing 105mm Hesh with the lower penetration, I haven't had much difficulty. The only vehicle I could see that would have a lot of difficulty potentially killing an IS-6 with Hesh is the RU-251, because it's the only tank in the game right now that has 90mm Hesh rounds. And those Hesh rounds, frankly, on the RU-251 are of limited value because you have Heat FS. And because their penetration is so low, they're really only good for taking out, like, trucks or vehicles that can be hull broken. And even then, Heat does the job just as well, so... but I'll get to the RU-251 in a minute. So yeah, IS-6, not overpowered, very strong. But give people time to figure it out. And you're going to see a lot of them right now, especially because the Russians simply do not have a good Tier 4 heavy tank. And this is the first one they've actually had. The IS-2 is capable, but it's not capable of assaulting a position and taking it from the enemy. If it does that versus King Tiger's T-29s, it just gets eaten alive. The only nation it could go up against that would give it, that it wouldn't have quite so many issues against would be the Japanese. And even then, the Japanese have, like, the Type 60, which is super sneaky. And generally, the Japanese are always supported by the Germans with their heavy tanks. So, the IS-2... for its merits, just isn't a good frontline heavy assault tank. It's more of a fire support vehicle, not if you think about it. So, the IS-6 was needed for the Russian tech tree. Do I think that they still need a 6.7 heavy tank? Yes, I do think that they should. And I think that, personally, what they should get is the IS-5. No, not the Object 730. The IS-5, like the regular IS-5, which is actually an IS-2, but with a 122mm gun removed and a 105mm S30 cannon in place, which is much faster firing, and essentially you get similar ammo types to, like, the T-34-100 or the T-54. I think that would be much more competitive. It'd be a mobile heavy tank. It wouldn't have the greatest of armor, but it could potentially bounce something every now and then, and your gun is fast-firing enough and has enough penetration that you can go toe-to-toe with most heavy tanks without much difficulty. I think that would be a great addition to 6.7. Now, if my intuition serves right, if they do introduce something like that, it probably will end up being a premium, but I really hope that's not the case. So, the IS-6. Strong, but not overpowered. And people, like I said, people keep asking me where I think the IS-6 should be in battle rating. I think it's fine where it's at. Putting it any lower than 7.0 is really problematic, because then it's even more common. And it's when you're playing the IS-6, you're always taking a risk, because there's always that possibility you could get up-tiered into an 8.0 game, and at 8.0, the IS-6 can do well. One of my friends has gotten like 6 or 7 kills in an IS-6 in an 8.0 game, but it's significantly weaker at that tier, and it's far more vulnerable because a lot more vehicles are firing HESH or Heat FS, which will just easily render the IS-6's armor almost useless. So, at 7.0, it's I don't want to say it's rare enough, because that's certainly not the case. I've seen games where a majority of, or like 2/3 of my team consist of nothing but IS-6s, but I've also seen worse. Like, the IS-6, it's common right now because it's the new thing on the block, and a lot of people are playing it. If you're really that concerned about the IS-6 spam, I'd say give it a month, don't play Tier 4 for about a month and a half, maybe 2 months, and play the lower tiers. Have a little bit of fun down there. And then once the spam has died down a little bit, come back to Tier 4, and then try it then. If you're really, really that pissed off about it, just take a break from Tier 4. Just give it a little while. Once people get bored of their new toys, then come back and enjoy your game. Yeah, you're going to still run into these vehicles every once in a while, but that's just a fact. That's just the way it is. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to get removed from the games, and because people have already spent money on those vehicles. So, yeah, like, you're going to have to either adapt, or you're going to have to just take a break and then come back and adapt later. So let's move on to a couple more vehicles here, because I know I'm running on quite long. The RU-251. So yeah, the RU-251 is probably, next to the IS-6, the most controversial vehicle in this patch, because it has given the Germans the one thing they've always lacked, and that is a fast, powerful, and very, very maneuverable light tank that can cap objectives. Because the Germans, up until this patch, have been a very, very defensive nation. At least in the way their tanks are oriented. Yes, they can attack, and they can do attack decently well, but they're not as well set up for it as, say, the Russians are. and vehicles like the King Tiger are very, very good when they can get themselves into a position where they can protect their flanks, and they're forced to fight in head-on battles. That's what King Tigers are good at doing, just dueling with enemy tanks. And the RU-251 grants the Germans something completely different that they've never had at that tier. And that's what's really throwing a lot of people off. Because the Panther II has been moved up to 7.0, so their one fast flanking medium that they had is not available at 6.7. It's available at 7.0, but it's nowhere near as common as it used to be when it was 6.7. And it's fine at 7.0. It can still do very well. The RU-251, like I said, gives the Germans that capability that they've never been able to achieve before. And the RU-251 is causing a lot of issues right now, because there's so many of them. Also, the RU-251 is much easier to get because you don't necessarily need a credit card in order to get one. You can always just buy, like, for example, if you have Steam, you can just buy Steam cards and then buy Golden Eagles through Steam's, for War Thunder through Steam. And you don't need a credit card to do that. You can just buy it with cash. So you're going to see a lot more RU-251s, I think, than you are going to see IS-6s. The RU-251 is slightly more expensive than the IS-6, but for what you're getting, for the capability you're getting for the Germans, I know a lot of people don't mind that price. And it's something else that a lot of people don't seem to be taking into account is the fact that the Allies are used to being the ones who are doing that to the Germans. They're not used to having it happen to them. They're not used to having these really, really fast maneuverable vehicles flanking them all the time, coming up behind them, disrupting their rear lines. And the Germans have never been able to do that up until now. And now that they are, a lot of people are calling the RU-251 overpowered. It's not overpowered. It's just a very, very good tank. There are very, very, very few vehicles that are overpowered in the game. Very, very few. And even those that are considered to be overpowered really aren't that overpowered. A lot of this is blown up. A lot of these like overpowered accusations are blown up much, much higher than they really are. They're blown out of proportion, is what I'm trying to say. And it's important to realize that it's going to take some time, but the Allied players will eventually figure out that they have to watch their flanks. They can't just go charging in to the objective and not keep their situational awareness about them. Especially if there's a good RU-251 player, and especially if he's a very, very good light tank player. Also, if you are a very, very good Leopard driver, you're going to love the RU-251, because the RU-251 is essentially a lower tier Leopard. Both in function and in the way it plays. They play exactly the same way. It's just that the Leopard A1 has a stabilizer. That's really the only difference between them. And so, the RU-251, while powerful, is not overpowered, and it's simply just a very, very good tank. Let's move on to the last vehicle here that I want to talk about. And the last vehicle that we're going to be talking about today is the FV4005 Stage 2. The FV4005 Stage 2, I wanted to make a Devlog Chats episode on this vehicle, but I never quite was able to get around to doing it. I even got information from Listy on the forums on the video, but I just never got around to making the Devlog Chats episode for this vehicle for whatever reason, and I really wanted to make one. Anyway, this vehicle is very black and white. You either love this vehicle or you hate it. And it's one of those two categories. It's not oh, I kind of like it, or I'm not really a big fan of it. It's no, I really don't like this vehicle, or this vehicle is fantastic, everybody should play it. I fall into the latter category. However, there are significant issues with this vehicle. Let me list them off for you. One of the longest reloads in the game, not the longest, but one of the longest for any single-shot tank gun. It has a massive profile, like this thing is literally as tall as a mouse, so it's very, very hard to miss, unless you're not paying any attention. And it has a limited traverse of 90 degrees. So you've got 45 degrees to the right, 45 degrees to the left, and that's all you got. And for a turreted vehicle, that's really bad. I mean, now, to be honest, if this vehicle could turn its turret 360 degrees, I think this thing might be a little bit overpowered. But, I mean, that's historically how it was. The vehicle could not do a full rotation of the turret, because if it tried to fire the gun perpendicular to the hull, it'd probably flip itself over. Even in real life, I don't know if you guys can see it on the back of the vehicle there, but there's a dozer blade. And what they had to do in order to actually, before they could fire this gun, was they would have to lower the dozer blade into the ground to brace the vehicle and then fire it. However, that's not practical for a video game, so luckily we don't have to deploy that. Anyways, so the FV405 is very black and white. You either love it or you hate it, and it's just one of those vehicles that requires you to know what you're doing in order to get the most out of it. This is not a noob-friendly vehicle like the KV-2 is. The KV-2 has a little bit of armor, so it can potentially bounce shots from enemy tanks. It's not going to bounce them all the time. In fact, quite a lot of the time you still get penetrated. But the KV-2 is relatively forgiving. That's also contributed to by the fact that the KV-2 is a very, very low battle rating, 4.3, I believe, in RB, and that's still a battle rating where a lot of people are still figuring the game out. And a lot of people are still figuring out whether or not they want to continue playing the game, or if they do want to continue playing the game, then, well, then they're going to have to... They're still trying to figure things out and trying to get better at the game. It's not a particularly... it's not particularly hard to do well at 4.3 if you're a good player. Or even a slightly above average player can do very, very well at the lower tiers. And so the FE405 has the issue of being a 6.7, and by that point, I'm not saying that people are that much smarter than they are at mid-tiers, but they have endured enough to have enough experience in the game to get to Tier 4, at the very least. And this is actually a Tier 5 game I'm showing you. I wanted to see how this thing would perform in Tier 5, and it turns out it performs pretty well. But anyway, the vehicle itself, it has these major disadvantages. It's tall, it's not very lightly armored, it's a huge target, it doesn't maneuver very well, it's got a very, very long reload. Did I mention it has a very long reload? But these are the advantages you do get. The biggest fuck-off gun in the game. And a HESH shell, the only rounds that you fire are HESH. It's not HE, like the KV-2 is, where there's always that possibility where, yeah, you may shoot somebody with HE, but they might survive because you didn't hit them in just the right spot. Like, let's say you're shooting at the front of a King Tiger, and not the front of an RU-251, like that guy found out. If you're shooting at the front of a Tiger with the KV-2, you might take his tracks off and you might blow his gun barrel out, but if you hit the front plate, but you're probably not going to kill him. If you hit the front of the turret, there's always the possibility the splash damage will go down, take out his ammo rack, and he might blow up that way. But it's not very reliable. This thing is reliable. And coming up here, there's going to be a Panther 2, and somehow he's going to manage to miss me. Like that. I don't know how this guy managed to do that, but yeah, he got punished for it. But that's just the way this thing operates. So this is definitely a vehicle that I recommend for the players who are pretty good at the game. If you're pretty good at the game and you can make this thing work, it's loads of fun. And as for its role, it's a second-line fire support vehicle. So what you need is somebody, like a teammate with you with a heavy tank, to roll around a corner, take a hit for you, and then you roll around right after him with your gun already pointed at the target, or in the direction of the target, and then blast them with a single shot. And I think I just took a HESH round there from a Leopard and managed to bounce that. I don't know how. So yeah, this vehicle, fantastic, loads of fun, but requires a certain amount of skill to play. With that, I'm going to let you guys go. This has been Many Miles Away. Keep your tracks checked, keep your binos in place, keep around the tube, and I will see you guys in the next video.